Yes, Parliament was back today and lots of games being played by the Parliament and those who would like the opposition to commit now, not later, to getting rid of the net zero targets. Barnaby Joyce has made the case many times over. He wants to have a debate about it in Parliament, and there will be one every Monday until we run out of speakers.
If you believe in net zero, it's a situation that which brings the demolition of our industrial base. We have the lowest manufacturing now of the OECD. We have a cost of living crisis. We are putting people into their cars. We have record insolvencies in small business. And this is on the merry path to net zero.
And the bloke who just won 94 seats, once you throw in the Teals, once you throw in the Greens, about 100 of the 150 seats in the Parliament, they say, bring it on. And he's raising the stakes now to almost biblical levels.
If you get rid of net zero, you are saying climate change is not real, and you do not need to do anything about it.
Now, you and I know that's not the case, that's not the truth, but as soon as we start to move into matters of faith, it's not about logic, it's not about evidence, it is about, in many ways, belief. As for a high priestess of the movement of belief, one of the Tiffany Teals, well, they think Christmas has come early.
So the irony is today, on one hand, you have the coalition led by Barnaby Joyce and his acolytes further making themselves further irrelevant. It's like a clown show in Parliament.
Now, reality is, anyone who knows regional Australia, anyone who knows National Party country knows that the public view is that they are the ones who have to bear the brunt for what people like Zali Steggall demand happen, which of course is major changes to their areas, their environments, to make sure that that's where the new renewables get built, to make sure that the cities can feel better about themselves. But the majority of people in the cities, per the last election, they seem to have the view that this is fine by them, that they are fine to pay the higher power prices, and younger voters in particular are in an intergenerational fight with their parents, but most likely their grandparents, about the existential need for climate action. As we have said, the younger you go, the more they believe in climate change and they believe in the organised religions, meaning the matters of heaven and hell are not as important about the heaven or hell that we live on when it comes to this planet. Now, none of that's news to you, but there was an interesting poll, and I think this was fascinating for the question that it did not ask directly. Now, I want to see the same polls that were largely right about the federal election ask a straight up and down question, because it helps give everyone a clear view about where the majority of Australians are. Should Australia stick by net zero by 2050 or abandon the target? And then you can ask a whole bunch of sub-questions underneath that. Instead, we got this question in polling and many different, almost complicated details after it. Let me show you the poll. The Climate Change Authority is expected to release a new target for the 2035 emissions. Most experts think that the target range will be up from the current 43%, that's my words, says 65 to 75%. Do you support or oppose such a target? Apparently 44% of people are fine with not just what we have now, but upping it to 65 or even 75%. That's green and teal levels. 18% of people say no, and 38% of people are sitting with the no opinion or unsure. So presumably they are there to be won over. Now, in the simple game of maths, the yes side has just 6% of 38% of people to convince. The no side, at 18%, has to convince an awful lot more people. It's 59% of Labor voters. It's 32% of coalition voters, with 29% saying no and 39% saying, I don't know, 64% of Green voters who say, yep, let's get it up to 65 to 75. And in terms of other voters, the vast majority there, 33%, and that goes everything from the Tiffany Teal through to One Nation and the old Palmer parties, but still, 33% of them say no. So, OK, what are you supposed to make of that? Now, again, the more words you add to a question, the vaguer, in many ways, the question is that you are asking. By removing yes, no, and putting in I don't care, I don't know, well, then again, you might well be diluting. But again, the overall fact right now, and for those who say the extreme majority of Australians say this or say that, the reality is that the biggest chunk of Australians in this poll say they're fine with what's happening now and they want even more. So it would seem politically to be the wrong place, where the discussion is no more than what we currently have. But a very significant number of people still remain unconvinced. And we have seen polling, which, of course, when it came to the voice, went from 60-40 yes to 60-40 no. So people can change their mind. But it's this bit that I think is really important for us all to know. Now, I don't say this because I advocate one position or the other, but because I want you to know what data there is around there about what people actually think. Both major parties support net zero by 2050, but some of the national parties say we should ditch the target. Which of the following do you think is the best approach for Australia to take? To be more ambitious than 43 is 17%. To keep the current 43 is 28%. Reduce the 2030 and just focus on 2050 is 12%. Get rid of it all is 17%. And again, 26% are unsure. So again, in a basic rule of maths here, 17 plus 28 versus 12 plus 17. The bigger bulk of people currently sit where we are or where theoretically the left and this government wants to push us, which is higher. A quarter of the country is still left to be won over. Now again, the presumption of all and everyone inside the political matrix is that 26 will just be added to the bigger number. People like our guest, Matt Canavan, tonight believes that when people hear a clear contrast coming from the opposition, there's a good chance that much of that 26 will move their way. And we get to a much more balanced position than the one that is pretty obvious. After the last federal election, again, about 100 seats in the parliament, obviously, by first preference or second preference, preferred the system that we have, and maybe even are looking forward to an even higher system than, of course, very passionate belief, but still the losing side of this election. Now, again, I don't say that because I have an absolute view that one way is the only way to go. And I have said a million times, and I've shown you the climate clock, that Australia is 1% of the world's problem, and why we would tie one or both hands behind our back makes no sense to me whatsoever. But as to where the rest of the country is, we can't sit in the bubble. We have to pay attention to the information that is out there. But fascinatingly, in these polling, there was not the straight-up question. Do you support net zero by 2050, yes or no? And that would be because I would suggest the pollsters were afraid of what the answer might be. Not because I know that the answer would be different to the one that they have shown in many different ways, but there's often a reason why they won't ask the most obvious question, such as is immigration too high in Australia, because they know what the answer might end up being. So you get watered down or fractured versions of questions where you have to pull out your calculator to end up working out where the majority or even big bulk of people are. I wonder why that might be. Now, as for our old mate Jim Chalmers, the snake charmer, as our wonderful friend Bronwyn Bishop would say, well, of course, he's just fresh off that economic roundtable. Weeks and weeks of preview, days and days of yabbing, and not much comes out of it. Towards the end of it, though, the one representative of the other third of the country that voted for a different government, or the two-thirds of the country that didn't vote for the government with its first preference, Ted O'Brien, the shadow treasurer, well, apparently there was some sort of a dust-up where there was some disagreement where Ted is pointing out all the issues with government spending, and Chalmers just, rather than engaging with the issue, just says, you've got all the numbers wrong. Ted O'Brien was interviewed about it in the past couple of days. This is what he had to say about his little fight, spoiling the Treasurer's party.
The government has to stop spending so much money of Australian taxpayers. And Jim Chalmers didn't like that. And of course, you know, that led to an exchange of words. But I have no regrets about it.
But if you just want to double check on the measure of a man, let's have a look at the peacocking behaviour of the Treasurer and the man who thinks he is the next Prime Minister when Anthony Albanese decides to get out of the way. Sooner rather than later, or in his life, about 15 elections from now, when he will be the longest serving Prime Minister of all time. Watch out, Menzies. Well, in question time today, there was this little exchange, and for a bloke who supposedly has the majority of the room, the majority of the economy, the majority of the electorate, he was acting quite like a spoilt brat today. This was his exchange between himself as the king of the castle, having a go at what he believes is a man unfit to be his opposite.
When I was told, Mr Speaker, that the member for Fairfax gave a speech about Charlie and the chocolate factory, I confess that the word Wonka was almost the word that came to mind.
Right back at you, pal, and I know the alphabet starts with A. Now, a couple of other things that have come in and around the conversations post that productivity summit, post that economic reform roundtable. Now, one of the problems that some people see with the Australian housing system is that you've stayed in your house too long, that I will have stayed in my house too long once the kids move out, that theoretically we should start life in a one-bedroom unit above a shop and end in a one-bedroom unit above a shop, that we should not have a forever home, that the home that you've slogged your guts out to be able to get, to keep, that you've taken care of, that you've done incredible things with the garden, that you put the retaining wall in, you put the pool in, you have the family over every Christmas, Easter, birthday, Father's Day, Mother's Day. No. They believe that it should be temporary, that everything should be temporary, that there is no pinnacle to home ownership. So the suggestion is that you should be taxed per the number of spare bedrooms that you end up having. This is a serious idea being rolled around. Now, again, what they may just quickly dismiss today will end up being Greens policy tomorrow, which will end up being Labor policy sooner rather than later. My view, you worked your guts out for your house, as big or as small as it currently is. You have every right to stay in it for as long as you want because you've earned that. Now, there are other ideas that are around, and I'll get to a pleasant version of one of those ideas today. But the idea that you've got to get out of the way for the next group as fast as possible is the ultimate metaphor for how, in many ways, much of the industrial left and certainly the government and much of the media is, that apparently we all have a use-by date. And as soon as that use-by date is reached, then just move along. Move along with your opinions, move along with your house, move along with your memories, so we can move the next group of people on who are more likely to agree with them, not us. Now, last night, I had a fascinating time in Hobart, loved it, but we had a conversation about housing. And I have been bubbling along on this issue for some time, and we've talked about it in lots of different ways for a long period of time. We've done it with our panels, with our guests, we've done it when it goes to pub tests, and it is a question that your kids, your grandkids, being able to afford a house of their own is a very significant issue. And it's not just that is unsurprising, but here comes the surprising bit. When you ask a follow-up question, what are people's reactions? This was the room of 100 hardcores of Paul Murray Live, fans of Sky News, asked a question, but pay attention to their reaction in the follow-up, and you'll know exactly where politics is in 2025. Who's worried about their kids and grandkids being able to afford a house? Now, just keep your hand up. Keep your hand up if you would be willing to vote for a party you'd never voted before if they could help answer that question. Think about that. Now, in many ways, while climate change, net zero, a whole bunch of other things, negative gearing, ends up being sort of the eye of the storm for one election, that eye often moves on. And it's not a crack at anyone who says that they've got the idea of what the eye in the storm is, but clearly housing, I think, is absolutely the eye of the storm right now in modern Australia. Now, I know people who have voted conservatively their entire life, but have told me that if voting Green would get a house for somebody that they loved, they'd seriously think about it. Now, that's why I think the Prime Minister is in a very interesting, if not very good place, with a policy that was first started by the Morrison government but has now been extended. This is the 5% deposit scheme. Today, the Prime Minister was talking about a scheme that he had taken to the election, as did the Liberal Party, but instead of it starting in January, it is to start now in October. Put simply, for first home buyers or single mothers, all you will need is a 5% deposit. Now, for anyone who is trying to look at that housing market for the first time, the deposit in many ways becomes the problem, right? Now, as you know, when it comes to stamp duty, that's a whole different conversation. But depending on the financial institution, it could be 10, it could be 15, it could be 20% that you need for the deposit. And then, of course, you have to have the 10% after that when it comes to the stamp duty. If you're a first home buyer, you may have 5% of that or none of that, depending, again, whether you hit in just the right point. But it is really important, I think, for the opposition in these early days of a returned government not to have a fight on everything all the time. Yes, point out what some of the problems are, but imagine how this stuff is going down in the lounge rooms of Australia, including with traditional voters. Now, quite appropriately, the opposition was in Parliament today saying, great, love the idea, it was our idea. Doing things with the building code, that was also our idea. But the shadow housing spokesperson was out pretty early and pretty hard about some of the changes that are going to come as a result of an increase in the number of people that we be able to access just 5% deposit for a house. To give you an idea of how this system works, it does not matter how rich or how poor the first home buyer is, but the scheme is limited to the type of property that you want to have a look at. So essentially, we are talking about a good 1 or 2 bedroom unit very close to the city, or potentially a little further out, the 2-bedroom house, and further out, or certainly in regional areas, we're talking about potentially a 3-bedroom house. Here is the notes via the Financial Review. Under the new property price caps, an eligible property in Sydney will now be $1.5 million. In a place like Adelaide, it'll be $900,000. Canberra will be $1 million, and Brisbane, $1 million. Now, for a chunk of change for your first place, you'll be able to get a pretty good one. And if that can unlock thousands of people being able to buy their own home, then whether I like it or not, and whether you like it or not, that is going to lock in tens of thousands of people probably behind this government, if not the political party and the Labor Party, for some time to come. You know how hard it is for me to say this, but this is the Prime Minister talking it up today.
We also want for first home owners to have a fair crack, and a 5% deposit will make a difference.
Now, are there inevitable consequences of when you have lower deposits and whether people are actually able to go on to pay off those loans? Yes, potentially that can be the case. Yes, a no-doc, no-deposit loan situation is what caused the housing crisis in 2008 in the United States. There's a whole series of variables why the risk's not as high. It's not non-existent, but not as high in Australia. As I said, the Shadow Housing Minister had that inevitably difficult job. The inevitable difficult job is going, hey, government's going to do this today because we're the opposition. What's wrong with it? Now, he was able to work out a pretty good line, which was, if it's not means tested, well, then this is true.
I think it is perverse and bizarre that the children of billionaires will now have access to a government insurance scheme.
And that's fair. Because if it was a Liberal Party that came up with an idea that was unlimited, it would all be about the billionaires' kids, and we'd end up having a conversation about setting a limit on it. But. When you have an electorate that is as desperate to make sure that the next generation has the same opportunities as this generation, even if it is the government that is the one who is making the announcement, and the opposition will get no credit for being there in the first place, having the original ideas in the final term of their government and again at the elections of 2022 and 2025, you don't automatically have to say no to everything. There are going to be ideas that are going to be incredibly popular that come out of a government which has done plenty wrong and that I would never advocate for voting for. But you've got to play smart here. Otherwise, you're going to end up in the same position where the Prime Minister and his media mates will be able to ram down the country's throat, whether it is true or not, that you said no to everything. And believe me, housing is an issue where people are willing to cross the street to embrace politicians they don't like, parties they've never voted for, because there's a result here. And in many ways, the entire majority, in my view, of the next 3 years is to make sure that the single biggest area of policy difference and populist policy difference is about home ownership. About home ownership. Because if the Libs can nail this, then they will be back in the game much sooner than all of the stats will tell us. If they don't, then all the stats tell us they won't. We've been keeping an eye on the treaty negotiations happening between First Nations people and the Victorian government, because it's all generally happened in secret. Now, this could end up in reparations, where any Indigenous person gets a chunk of change at the start, gets a chunk of change every year, gets a percentage of mining royalties, gets a percentage of every time you go on a freeway and you pay a toll. I don't know what that system's going to be. But one thing that was very clear after the 2023 referendum was that Victoria didn't want a voice. They certainly didn't want a voice in the Constitution. Even woke Victoria, in between voting and voting again for Labor governments, they said no. Well, we learned today what might end up being a voice to Parliament that is on its way regardless of what Victorians voted for. The First Nations treaty negotiations have wrapped up with a body set to hold government to their promises. This bloke is the co-chair of the First Peoples Assembly, and this is his quotes in the past couple of days. We'll establish a new accountability mechanism to provide independent oversight for government from a First Peoples perspective. That sounds like a voice to Parliament, right? We will be able to make representations and work with ministers to ensure that they deliver for First Peoples. That sounds like a voice to Parliament, right? We will provide concrete solutions and recommendations to improve outcomes for our communities, helping to make the most of investment in systems and programs directed to First Peoples. That sounds like a voice, right? Well, what about the sting in the tail? It will be based in the Victorian Parliament. The co-chair says that it will not have the ability to override the decisions of the Parliament, but simply to hold them account and to give them advice, which last time I checked was the voice to Parliament. Can you believe that people, despite knowing that they will get caught, despite knowing that a camera will pick it up somewhere, are still willing to carry the flags of terrorist groups in peace or so-called peaceful protests in and around Australia? Somebody was deciding to fly a Hamas flag. Now, Hamas is a prescribed terrorist group in Australia, and to display terrorist symbols in the country apparently is a crime. Yet no one was arrested for holding that flag, the same as no one has been arrested for holding the swastika on the Sydney Harbour Bridge. The Premier said the right thing today, that he condemns what took place here, that it's hideous, it's unlawful, and they should bear the full force of the law. I agree with you, Premier, and you know how big a supporter I am of David Crisafulli. That individual can't get away with that because it's provocative, it's insightful, it's anti-Semitic. It's the kind of behaviour we don't want to see in this state and in this nation. Well, absolutely. But could somebody explain to me how that person hasn't been arrested yet? Or the one who was holding up the swastika, as I said, on the Sydney Harbour Bridge? No, as we showed you last night, the only arrest was this.
40 demonstrations took place around the country. In Brisbane, an estimated 7,000 marched. Like here, it was peaceful, apart from one group of men with Australian flags throwing insults at marchers. Police moving in swiftly and arresting a ringleader.
Now, we learn a little more about what exactly was taking place, why was that person confronted and arrested. And again, I'm not sitting here trying to find some way to defend, but I just would like to know what was going on. If the person with the terrorist flag not engaged with, why was that person engaged with? Well, we turn to the left-wing publication in Brisbane called the Brisbane Times. Only one person detained at Brisbane's rally. A 52-year-old man wearing a shirt saying "Victims don't hold hostages" and clutching the national flag was among a small group of South Bank overpass on the march just before 3 p.m. on Sunday. Now, this is the most detail I have found anywhere in the press about why that bloke was confronted. This masthead was in attendance and watched him yell the national anthem before firing off insults and making rude gestures at protesters below. Now, I'm not saying that there's anything pleasant about a rude gesture, and I don't know what the insult was. Now, clearly, we've got some TV tape. I'd love to see it. Again, I'm not defending this person. And it's good that the police are trying to say, hey, you're the one causing trouble, move over. Well, why not the same for the person who was waving the flag of Hamas? Let's all learn together in the next few days. Now, while you were working hard, Parliament was back, and that means politicians are making crappy videos on social media. Remember, there's a full-time staffer for each and every politician to make these dumb videos, including this one from the Greens.
Am I the best gamer in the Senate? Hell yeah. I just missed a call from Bob Brown. Do you reckon I should send him a text going, hey, I'm playing Fortnite. I'm on Twitch streaming Fortnite, Bob.
This one from the youngest senator.
On the bottom, Paige, you were good. I'm waiting for you to be great. And next, Kendall. You didn't stick out to me. Next is Brooke. Nia, you're third on the pyramid. You were third overall high score.
She was ranking the haters. And we've got one more from the Greens, this one about the NDIS.
If I make this shot, the government are going to stop kicking people off the NDIS with no foundational supports in place.
These people are all paid at least $200,000. Higher the longer, and if they're shadow ministers or party spokespeople, up and up they go. Guaranteed amongst all of these people, if they're in the Senate, that they're going to earn $1.2 million. And part of their job is apparently making crap like that, while you were earning way less and working way harder, no doubt.